Be a philosopher, but in the midst of all your philosophy, be still a man. It is not reason which is the guide of life, but custom. When we reflect on the shortness and uncertainty of life, how despicable seem all our pursuits of happiness. We ourselves are not only the beings that reason, but also one of the objects concerning which we reason. Nature, by an absolute and uncontrollable necessity, has determined us to judge as well as to breathe and feel. Beauty is not a quality of things themselves. It exists only in the mind that contemplates them, and every mind perceives a different beauty. A man who is free from mistakes can pretend to no praises except from the justness of his understanding, but a man who corrects his mistakes shows at once the correctness of his intellect and the candor and ingenuity of his temperament. In this video, we talk about David Hume, one of the greatest philosophers of the British Enlightenment. There is no doubt that in a video of a few minutes his entire work cannot be presented, so I would like to focus your attention on two fundamental concepts of his thought: the cause-effect relationship and empiricism. Why these themes in particular? Because if we think about it, they have a lot to do with today's reality, in which we are constantly exposed to a continuous flow of information, images, and news, sometimes verified, sometimes not. Hume, with his focus on experience and systematic doubt, can offer us useful tools to think critically about how we form our beliefs, especially when we come across phenomena such as fake news. Stay with me to discover together how the ideas of an 18th century philosopher can still speak to us, advise us, and perhaps warn us in the digital age. David Hume, a Scotsman, is famous for his skepticism and for asking questions that are still very topical. About his masterpiece, Human Nature, it is the only science of man, and yet it is still the most neglected. I shall be satisfied if I can make it a little more popular. It is this hope that helps to soothe my anguish, restoring the vigor stolen from me by the indolence that sometimes possesses me. The mind is a kind of theater where several perceptions successively their appearance pass and repass, glide away, and mingle in an infinite variety of attitudes and situations. Hume was skeptical about our ability to know causes definitively. Causation cannot be known because it cannot be observed. All that can be observed is one event and then another event. If we must forever be a prey to errors and delusions, that they shall at least be natural and entertaining. The existence, therefore, of any being can only be proved by arguments from its cause or its effect, and these arguments are founded entirely on experience. In David Hume's philosophy, the representations present in the human mind are not ideas but perceptions, thus emphasizing the empirical origin of mental contents. These perceptions are divided into two large categories: impressions and ideas. The former are immediate and vivid, while the latter are attenuated copies of the former. For example, an impression is of someone who feels pain from a wound, while an idea is the memory of the wound. This leads us to ask, how can we come to understand the causal relationship between events? Hume argues that our idea of cause and effect does not derive from an intrinsic necessary connection, but rather from habit and the repetition of experiences. When we observe that an event A is frequently followed by an event B, our mind establishes a connection, even though we can never directly perceive this causal relationship. When we see, for example, that water evaporates every time we heat it, we begin to assume that there is a cause-effect relationship, but in reality we can never be certain that this is the case. For Hume, for a cause and effect relationship to exist, three elements are needed: the spatial contiguity between two events, their temporal succession, and the necessity of this succession. However, experience only provides the first two, since it only tells us what has happened without guaranteeing that it will happen again. Man is a habit-forming animal, and all politics and history take place within a history of custom and habit. This is not a bad thing. Life without custom and habit would be a nightmare. Let's take the example of billiards. When a ball hits another, we observe contiguity, contact, and succession. Immediately after the hit, the second ball moves. But we see no necessity for this movement. Who can exclude that the next time the ball hit will remain still? Habit explains why we believe in causality and what its practical function is, but it cannot rationally justify it. We are accustomed to seeing certain sequences of events, and therefore we form expectations based on these experiences. There is not to be found in all history any miracle attested by a sufficient number of men of such unquestioned good sense, education, and learning as to secure us against all delusion in themselves. Taking a practical current example, let's think about social media. We live in a bubble of personalized experiences. How can they influence us? Do these experiences really show us reality? Hume noted in the 18th century that we cannot prove a cause-effect connection with certainty, but only become accustomed to seeing certain events together. How often do we assume that A causes B, when in reality they are just coincidences? For Hume, it is not reason that guides us, but emotions. Reason is, and ought only to be the slave of the passions. This is super timely in an age of emotional marketing and irrational choices. A wise man apportions his beliefs to the evidence. With this phrase, Hume emphasizes how thought must be based on experience and empirical evidence, rather than on abstract principles or mere speculation. It is a key concept in his philosophical approach, in which knowledge derives from the observation of facts and their continuous verification. No testimony is sufficient to establish a miracle unless the testimony be of such a kind that its falsehood would be more miraculous than the fact which it is intended to establish. In essence, Hume, known for his skepticism about absolute beliefs and the ability of reason to fully understand the world, invites everyone to think critically about how we form our knowledge and beliefs, emphasizing that many of our certainties are based on habits and perceptions rather than incontrovertible evidence. This approach has had a great impact on subsequent philosophical and scientific thought. Thank you for joining us on this short journey through David Hume's thought and discovering how his insights continue to influence the way we think today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment with your thoughts on Hume.